now? Okay. And so thank you all for joining. We have, this is the Our Ladies Philadelphia meetup. And we have our guest today is Jenny Bryan talking about Let Me GitHub search that for you. And Our Ladies is a worldwide organization that promotes gender diversity in the R community via meetups and mentorship in a friendly and safe environment. And gender diversity includes, but is not limited to, cis trans women, trans men, non-binary, genderqueer, and agender. So we welcome all of you to our community. We do have a code of conduct that you can find on our website, ourladies.org/COC. And if there are any violations of the code of conduct, you can report that to reporting@ourladies.org. We welcome more to get involved with Our Ladies Philly. So you can learn about our future meetup events at our meetup site. You can join our Slack community. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can volunteer as a speaker, mentor, or organizer. We're so excited to have Jenny Bryan. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm a software engineer at Posit, which you may previously known as our studio. And so I have been joined by my dogs. I don't know if you can hear them. I apologize. Okay. If
Okay.
you will eventually see them probably as well, but they have to be locked in here with me because they make mischief when everyone else leaves the house. Okay. So historically, I've worked on the tidyverse team, which is still true, but over the past year and a bit, I've actually been working primarily on Positron, a new IDE, while also still maintaining my usual R packages, but probably not doing as good a job. Most definitely not doing as good a job of it. I came from a statistics background and then got increasingly interested in doing data analysis and the tools of data analysis, and eventually fell off the edge of that field and landed more in software development. Yeah, I maintain a bunch of R packages, which are all on Git and GitHub, which will explain a lot about why I do so much GitHub code search. And yeah, I think that's all I really need to say.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will let you take over.
Okay, and I am successfully, well, I haven't started sharing yet, can see the chat. So hopefully that will persist once I'm going to share a slide deck and my browser. Yes, okay, I can still see chat. So I don't think this will be like a jam-packed hour. I think it's probably more of a 20 to 30 minute structured thing, and either we'll then end early or can do some live prompt activity stuff together. So to that end, if there are questions that come up as I'm going, and I can actually see the chat, which is an innovation for me, feel free to ask questions and I might just pause and take them as I'm going. So this should be quite casual. So the material I'm going to go through on GitHub code search. The title is inspired by this, somewhat snarky like website and phrase that people use when like someone asks a question, I don't know, how old is so and so, and then the response is like, well, let me Google that for you. Like that information is available. And so I feel a little bit the same way about let me GitHub search that for you. In the sense that I think there's lots of questions that get asked in sort of software and data contexts where at least step one might actually be a GitHub code search. And so this little unit, I don't know if you can you hear the dogs? No?
Just a little bit. It's not,
So
it's fine.
so loud. Okay. Anyway, so this unit came from the package development workshop that I recently taught at PositConf in August, I guess. And I did kind of a last minute addition of this section because I think it's so powerful for package developers, especially as you're becoming more intermediate or advanced, that you're going to have a lot of questions that like no one has written the perfect documentation to answer a question, and you need to be a bit more creative in finding answers to these, and often reading other people's source code is the way to answer those questions. And we've actually had a little bit of content like this in a previous year in the What They Forgot workshop, but I've always wanted to like expand this and talk about it more. So I put it in package development this year. And then I just felt like the whole day there were questions people had, and we were able to say like, oh, well, there's a really obvious GitHub code search we can do. Like it was just like reinforced all day that there's tons of questions you have as you're solving coding puzzles, and often you can at least get some extra information from searching the code that's on GitHub. And then Shannon, I think you just put out, I don't know if you contacted me or put out a call, but I was like very interested in further developing this, maybe writing a blog post about it. And then when she was looking for someone to talk about it, I'm like, yes, absolutely, yes. So I'm happy to be here, and that these slides are lifted from that workshop, which we'll also go look at those materials online at some point. And so I'm going to kick off with an example of how this comes up for me. I guess like one last thing I want to say, stage setting, like why I think this is so important is like on a personal journey to becoming a better programmer. I think methods of self-help and self-development are incredibly valuable for being able to answer your own questions. I'm like not always having to go to some external authority. So I feel like this is very empowering, and that's true of another technique. Making reproducible examples is also an incredible way to answer your own question often, or at least maybe you can't always answer your own questions, and that's also going to be true with GitHub code search isn't going to solve all your problems, but you can usually get extra information that allows you to do another experiment that maybe answers your question, or at least it makes you ask a much better question when you go ask that external expert, because you've tried something or you see someone else doing this with the following technique, but that doesn't seem to apply to your question, but you create a question that's going to elicit like a vastly better answer. So that's why I think this is so important. Okay, so the real example that I featured in these slides, and I will explain it in detail so you understand why I'm doing the code search, but like the content of the example isn't nearly as important as like the mindset. So I was doing a little bit of maintenance on an R package called use this before the conference, and I merged a pull request that updated the GitHub Actions workflows for use this. So for all of our R packages and tidyverse and rlib, every time we push, some GitHub Actions workflows run that will run our command check on the package. And that's like a constant set of health checks to see how the package is evolving. But those workflows themselves change over time and need to be kept up to date. So I merged change to those workflows and got the result you see here, which is, this package passed our command check on a very large matrix of operating systems and versions of R, except for Ubuntu latest. So the latest, like a recent Linux operating system and with release R. But it was weird to me that this change only broke tests in one of these jobs. So that seems strange. So why are they only failing on Ubuntu latest? So when I go look at the actual log of failure, I see that it's a failure of 2 tests, because use this itself helps people place these GitHub Actions files, and like the name of the file or the job or something has changed. So it's like a pretty trivial change, but like that's real. That's part of why I was updating the GitHub Actions. So that's not the mystery. The mystery is, why is it only failing on one part of the matrix? So then I go look at one of the green check runs, so Mac OS latest, and I see that 838 tests are being run and passed, but 31 of them are being skipped. So that's, and the two failing tests are in those skips. So I'm like, all right, why am I only running those tests on one element of the matrix? Why is that? Okay, so then I realize that I go look at the failing tests and I see there's a skip right at the start, and it says skip if no git user. Because use this does some things with Git and GitHub, but if Git hasn't been configured on the CI machine, you can't do those tests. And in particular, this is here because there are CRAN check machines that don't have a Git user configured. So this keeps things from failing on CRAN in the absence of Git. And I was like, oh, okay. So it means that there's no Git user configured for those other jobs. And I'm like, I usually set that up. So I must have allowed sort of more changes to come into my workflows than I meant to. And so I was like, I'm going to need to restore that setup. So this is the type of mistake that I've made multiple times before, where I update my GitHub Actions workflows and I just take all the changes, and I should have been a little more careful. And I'm like, okay, so we finally got into the question now. What's the usual way to configure the Git user in the GitHub Actions workflow? And my diagnosis of the problem, mind you, at this point is completely wrong. Okay, but this is an example of solving your own problem. So my question is, how do I configure the Git user in a GitHub Actions workflow? So I could Google that. I could fire up ChatGPT or GitHub Copilot. I could, God help us, go to the documentation for GitHub Actions and spend like 6 hours trying to find this piece of information. I could have a similar long journey reading Git man pages. I could put it out there for the community. I could ask in Slack, ask my local expert. So these are all these alternatives. And sometimes you will need to do all of these things. But this is a perfect example. And I think this comes up for me many times a day. The first thing to do is search GitHub to find a working example of configuring the Git user in a GitHub Actions workflow. So here is an example of the search I would run and did run to answer this question for myself. So I remember that like the way you set up a Git user, it's like git config user.name, git config user.email. Like I've done that little incantation enough times that I had this little shred of text. User.name, I was like, I'm pretty sure it involves that. Then, GitHub is a big place. So I need to sort of narrow things down a bit more. And then I'm like, I know I've done this before, and I maintain several packages in the rlib organization on GitHub, or if any of my colleagues have set this up, like I trust them. So I narrow things down by saying I'm looking for user.name as a string. I only want to look in repositories owned by rlib, which is where the tidyverse team keeps kind of tooling packages. And I ran the search once with only those two queries, and it was too many results. And I was like, oh, and I know it needs to be a YAML file. And I could have even been more precise about the path, because GitHub Actions workflows live in a very specific place within a repository. But this was enough, saying that it should look like, that you can use a glob pattern here, that it should have a YAML extension, narrowed things down. Okay, so that gives me 25 hits. And this is, of course, one of the hits is use this itself, and was the actual YAML file that was running the workflow that had failed. And there is the code, git config dash dash global user.name GitHub actions. But and it's there, but this code search directed my eyes to the right part of this file, where I also see that I only configured the Git user for Ubuntu latest R release R. And so then, I'm sorry that this is such a boring example, but like the whole journey was that it was a legitimate failure. I needed to update the test, but it also made sense that it only failed on just this one job. But so at the time I was making these slides, like I just needed like a recent organic example. But this is the type of GitHub code search that I do. I don't know, I feel like once an hour practically, when there's some little puzzle. And by far the most efficient way to answer that question for myself is to try to answer it for myself by searching GitHub. So when you do a GitHub code search, there's also this left-hand sidebar, and it will allow you to look. I'll go to the browser soon and we'll just park ourselves there probably. Allows you to refine things more. And so it allows you to get at some of the more advanced options here, which you might be able to do by clicking. And then you can also go read like actual documentation on running more advanced search. So you can go try these in a moment, but these are my top tips for GitHub code search. So you saw that I limited this one to rlib owning the repository. An extremely powerful technique is to say user CRAN. So why does that work? That's because there is a read-only, unofficial mirror of all, I don't know, many thousands of R packages that are on CRAN. So whenever somebody releases a package on CRAN, this MetaCRAN organization will grab the tarball, unpack it, which is sort of re-inflating it to like just the source code of the package, and pushes a commit here. And so if you have a question about how do you do X in an R package, you can search the entire code base of every package on CRAN by including user CRAN in your query. Okay, so this will dramatically increase the quality of your results, because you'll know that you're looking only at R packages and R packages that have gotten themselves onto CRAN. So like that is a certain type of quality assurance. So this is an incredibly powerful filter. And the package itself doesn't have to be maintained on GitHub, even though many packages are, because a package will be represented in this organization whether or not it has its own sort of development home on GitHub. And Alice is saying, is there also a mirror like this for Bioconductor? I'm not the best person to answer, but like Bioconductor has embraced GitHub in a way that CRAN has not. So I'm thinking it's probably not as unofficial like a read-only mirror, but that the source code of Bioconductor packages, like by definition, is available on GitHub. But if anybody wants to chime in or type out an answer, you know, for sure the answer is yes. But I don't know the actual, org. Yeah, so you would do user Bioconductor to perform the equivalent search. Okay, so that's an incredibly useful filter. If I don't want to search all of CRAN, but because that can be also like produce an overwhelming number of hits, I'm biased, but I often try to look at what other people on the tidyverse team are doing, or like what I've done in some other package I maintain, but like I can't remember at the moment. So user tidyverse or user rlib are other users that I frequently include in my GitHub code search. GitHub search, like the exact syntax of these little filters is like, semi-intuitive, but as soon as I want to do anything remotely fancy, like use a regular expression to search, I can never remember exactly how I'm supposed to do it. So this is a tool where I regularly consult the documentation. Like it's just one of those. So don't, you are not alone if you need to remind yourself of some of the more advanced searching techniques on a regular basis.
I think that's like worth pausing on. I don't know that our like people in the group know that you can do a regular expression in a search.
Yes. Let's like put a pin in that because
Yeah.
I'll show you we're really almost to the end of the slides. But then I have prompts from the workshop that we could literally go off and I'll try some, and then someone can try one with a regular expression so that we can get a good example up. Yes, so that is super powerful, and I never remember exactly what it's supposed to look like. So let's make sure we do one of those live together. Another high value filter is, can you all see my mouse? Yes, okay, here. So is to limit it to a specific repository, in particular WCH, which stands for Winston Change, R source. And this is probably the example that motivated Shannon to do. I know that she saw a lot of code search going on at an R core development hackathon day. And so I have a slide about this as well. So again, in the same way that CRAN does not use GitHub, but there is a read-only mirror of all CRAN packages. Our core does also not use GitHub, but there is a read-only mirror of the R source that's mirroring the R source as it evolves on an SVN host. And so that is maintained by Winston. So that's why the user is WCH. But so this is a very frequent filter for me as well. When you want to try to find something in the R source specifically, this allows you to search it in it's the easiest way I know to search around in the code base of R itself. And I guess probably some of the most typical ways I end up here is like I'm getting some error message that I don't think I should, or I don't understand why. And so I'll search for some fragment of the error message in this repository to get myself in the right neighborhood of the code base to like see like, how did I get here? I'm very surprised that I'm here. Like that's a very typical thing. I'm going to look at the chat for a second. What if we have multiple repos to search for? We'll try, let's do an example. Let's note these questions and we're going to go try them. But you either just dump them all in and the anding is implicit, or you use an explicit and. So let's make sure we come back and check that. Gists are not included. You'd have to go search gists, and I'm not even sure how searchable gists are, but definitely not included by default. You're only searching GitHub. Okay, so let's back up to this. So, pro tips, user CRAN, user tidyverse, or whatever your favorite set of developers is, or individual developer. Or if you're trying to find something that you did somewhere, so it could be like user and it could be yourself. Searching within the R source is another super common special case. And the other qualifiers that I use the most are path. So you saw that here, where you can specify like just the extension, or if you know you're looking for something in tests, it might be tests/test that/star, but you can say a little bit about the file path where you want hits to be found, and language. So language : R, or given my current life, TypeScript. But you can specify. So a way to get at files that are written in the language of interest is either through file extension, which you can specify with path, or specifying the language itself, which is based on GitHub actually detecting the language in a file. And a qualifier that's newly relevant for R is symbol. So hopefully we can go play with all of these in the prompts. And this is newly relevant because the development of positron has like nurtured the development of a tree sitter grammar for R, which is now being used by GitHub. And so GitHub has much better code intelligence about R than it used to. And R is sort of leveling up to get some of the same kind of code intelligence that a language like Python has. And so it will know the role that a particular string plays in a file, like if it's a symbol. Yeah, so Heather, yeah, these are all, path R. All right, let's go, we'll try that also in an experiment. We can, maybe let's see if a regular expression works for path, and then you could like put a word boundary there, right, at the end. Or yeah, I think that would be, that's my tentative answer. Because yeah, I guess this just doesn't come up to me for me. Yeah, so all right, let's come back to that. Let's try to answer that question for ourselves. So this may be like, yeah, that's the end of like a formal presentation. So I presented that intro in this workshop, and then we had a your turn session where I have some prompts for people. And another recent search I did, just to give you one more example, is, and this was, this happened, I don't know, last week. I was reviewing a test that PR, and I saw usage of a function expect snapshot failure. And I was like, I've never even heard of that. And I use test that a lot. And so I went and searched for expect snapshot failure in test that itself. I found its definition. I looked at get blame, and it's been there for 4 years. And then again, by reading all of this sort of adjacent code, I realized that it's a test used only inside of, it's an expectation only used inside of test that, to write expectations about expectations. So not relevant to someone using test that. But so that's an example, another example of the type of searches that I do. So, is there, I think there's nothing sort of pending in the chat that the answer isn't, let's go try some of this stuff. So I ran this package development workshop at Conf, and I had a bunch of prompts for GitHub code searches. So here is the documentation for GitHub code search that I do consult on a regular basis. So, if you're looking for an exact string, you want to surround it with quotes. Especially if there's any special characters. And then I spend a lot of time staring at this page, and I have a feeling that's going to be the answer to Heather's question. Although it's not, we'll find out if you can use it for path, or if it only applies to like the string you're searching for, if anyone has the answer to that. Yeah. Yeah, so here's an example of using a regular expression on a path. So I'm now newly optimistic that that's going to work. So I'm wondering if we should maybe, I don't know if we can make music play, if anyone knows how to do that, but give ourselves 5 or 10 minutes to play with these, and people could dump. You can actually, when you do a GitHub code search, so I also use this slash command very often to get there. So I'll do the first one live. The call type argument, I'll do this one. To read CSV seems to be used in different ways. How can I see the different ways people are using it? Okay, how can I filter out? All right, so I'll go to github.com. All right, so I'm gonna be looking in repo, tidyverse, read R, and I've now promptly forgotten everything I'm looking for. I'm looking specifically for read CSV. All right, so that's like the bare minimum. Oh, but I don't want to look, I'm looking for usage, right? If I want to look how people are using it, I actually don't want the limit to the repo. I just want read CSV. All right, and so then you see like, oh, great, there's a Python function named read CSV. So then this is where you might, narrow things down by setting the language or setting the path. But as Heather says, you get RMD files as well, or you could, if you only want to see how it's used in packages, this might get you closer. So, but this is like an example of how I play around with these sorts of things. So do we want to do music and pause a bit, or do people just want to ask questions, or do we want to end early? I've planted the seed. Yeah, I'm open to what direction people want to take this.
Yeah, let's
And
give people a few minutes to play around with this. I shared the link to the prompts in the chat, and I will attempt to play some music.
do I need to stop sharing?
You might need to, yeah.
Okay. Then I can also try the exercises myself. I didn't exactly go through them all this morning. So. But yeah, I think, and as people, so when you're on a code search, like the one I just did for readr, and you capture the link you're pointing at, I'm going to paste one into the chat. It produces a link that like other people could click on, and that will drop them into the same search you just ran. Like hopefully if people click on that one in chat, it like it's as if they typed the same filters, right? So people are now welcome to run interesting GitHub code searches, either the prompts that we used in the workshop, or maybe trying to start answering some of these questions we've already had for ourselves. And then if you succeed, capture the URL and drop it in the chat, and we can all look at each other's, and then you could, maybe you could reply with an explanation of what you were looking for or something like that. But so yeah, let's now take some time to sort of play with it for a few minutes. And if we can figure out, I can hear music. So Shannon, do you want to be in charge of timing? Like how long do we want to?
I'll do that too.
copy.
Okay, I think we answered some of our questions from earlier, that you absolutely can use a regular expression when specifying a pattern for the file path. And so then if you put like the $sign at the end, you'll find only .r files instead of .rmd, .rmw, all those other things that we were talking about. So we answered that question. We learned that I guess the URLs that the Arc browser puts on the clipboard don't have that like full on URL encoding when you copy them, so they're like a little more easy on the human eyes. But I assume other people have been able to capture, like I can click on Heather's links and they work. It's just I think Arc is doing a nicer job of saying this is the version of the link to show to people's eyeballs, and this is the actual URL we're going to visit. And then I put a couple more in there. So one of the prompts was finding people doing interesting things with the not CRAN environment variable to control behavior of their tests. And then I also put a solution in for finding the on-attach function in the tidyverse meta package where you could then like read what it does. But so hopefully that gets people's creativity flowing. It gives you a sense of what's possible with GitHub code search. And you've basically seen the universe of the main sort of tricks that I use in terms of where I look and which specific little pieces of query I use the most often. I'm sure that there's tons of much more advanced usage out there, but this little sliver that I've shown you today like gets me very, very far. And it's just something that I use all the time, to answer my own questions or to refine my questions so that by the time I do ask other people, I've made a lot of progress on my own. That's all I have to say, and I will share. Sorry.
One lingering question in the chat. I don't know
Oh, okay.
what the zzz.r file is. Do you have any insight there?
Oh, yes. So zzz.r is just a convention. It's just like a human convention. There's nothing super official about it. But when you have sort of package level infrastructure, so for example, the .on attach function is basically a hook. Like that function will get called whenever your package is attached. But a user generally will never call on attach. But then you have this question of like, well, where do I put it? And so you'll see packages with AAA.R and ZZZ.R, and those are just places people park package level infrastructure and maybe these sort of hook type functions that need to run. And if you want it to run before all of your other code is sourced, you put it in AAA.R. And if you're happy for it to run after all your other code is sourced, you put it in ZZZ.R. So that's all it is. It's like another .r file, but it's just a naming convention that a lot of people follow. And I'll distribute this link to the folks who invited me, but also if you went to the prompts, that takes you to the repository where that whole workshop, the whole package development workshop, was hosted out of. And so if you go up to the main and like down into the materials, you'll see slides. And like I just pulled a tiny sliver of those slides out to show you today. But so we'll distribute that link, but you'd be able to, you already have the URL you need to find those slides and those prompts, but we'll recirculate that, I'm sure.
Thank you. Definitely. I encourage people to like take the time to read that GitHub search documentation. It might feel a little overwhelming when you get started, but just spending a few minutes tackling it and getting more familiar with it will definitely pay off in the long run.
Yeah. Yeah, just set a goal. Like I'm going to do 2 GitHub searches today. Like the first 2, because I promise you, if you're working on code, there will be something that happens where you're like, oh, why don't I look and see how other people do this? And then read whatever docs you need to make it work. And then just do that several times and you'll find your set of like 3 or 4 moves that get you through like 90% of what you need to do.
All right, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you so much, Jenny.
This was my pleasure.